So this is India Simmons interviewing Mr. Villasana on April 12, 2019 in the Texana room. So Mr. Villasana, why don't you start off by telling us when and where were you born?
I was born in Dallas in 1953. Kind of an eventful period in our city. It was kind of still a small town back in those days, and not much of a city at all. But obviously part of that kind of post-war baby boom generation.
I see. And what was your neighborhood like?
Well, I grew up in kind of the Little Mexico area of Dallas, which would have been more of the inner city kind of area, and it kind of varied. It was an older area, of course, and my dad's and family had little mom and pop grocery stores and filling stations, kind of catering to the Latino community there, and which was the largest barrio in Dallas. There were several little Mexican barrios, but that was really the largest. So things like grocery stores and bakeries and things like that would cater to the Latino community were important, and that's kind of one of the areas that I grew up in. And then we moved a little bit farther away, but still kind of the northern part of the Little Mexico barrio, and again, kind of older housing stock. And when people move with their like have another kid or something, they need a larger space, a little bit better yard, but pretty much in that area along what's kind of now uptown in Dallas, and along Turtle Creek in that area there was the old barrio.
And can you tell us a bit more about your family?
My dad was a working class kind of guy. He had come back from, he was the youngest of several children. He was born in Mexico, as were all my aunts and uncles. And he was the youngest of the 6 kids. And they came over in 1916 from their home in Mexico because of the violence of the Mexican Revolution. It was kind of at its height at that point, or certainly was to the point where they were ready to leave, and leave, a country and a way of life that they had lived for hundreds of years. Mm-hmm. And so they crossed over and put a nickel in the little turnstile at Laredo and crossed the International Bridge, and first settled around kind of the central Texas area around in Austin, near there, and eventually part of the family came to Dallas. As I said, they had been kind of mercantile kind of folks anyway, and involved as merchants. In Mexico, there were some newspaper people. They ran some newspapers, and so they kind of from a group of people who appreciated the kind of up and comingness of the 20th century, and they wanted the best for their kids, including a good education, and foremost for they could be safe.
Any siblings?
I have a younger sister, and then a couple of, 3 half-sisters. Okay.
So had anyone else in your family attended college before?
No, not anyone directly. Now given my many aunts and uncles, I had a lot of cousins, first cousins, and still do, fortunately. One of my first cousins, who's probably the closest in age to me, since my dad was the youngest, my aunts and uncles, my cousins tend to be many years, sometimes generations, mm-hmm. older than me. But the one who's closest in age to me was Renee Martinez, and Renee came here to SMU on a scholarship a few years before I came here, and he was real instrumental in kind of directing me toward looking at SMU as a school, as a place for college.
I see. So in your immediate family, you were the first one to go?
Correct.
Okay, wonderful. So growing up, what did a normal day at home look like for you?
Back in those times,
mm-hmm.
Well, it was really everything for even in high school, but certainly when I went to SMU, was really focused on studying, reading and studying and reading, doing your homework and kind of getting ready for a class. And I really was wanting to. SMU opened up for me. My first days out here, it opened up to kind of a vista that I had never seen before. One of the things was, people from other parts of the country and different accents and different attitudes and whole. They were by and large, well-educated kids I was with. Now, when you go to an inner-city public school, that's not necessarily what you're surrounded with, all right? And so that was an adjustment. So a lot of it was trying to make sure I was caught up and understood what was going on and acclimating to the culture, understanding. My family's always liked politics, so it was also understanding how student government worked here, because that's something that I was president of my senior class in high school, and I kind of wanted to continue to be involved in kind of leadership positions, if I could, in the SMU student life.
Okay. And in your neighborhood growing up, how would you describe race relations?
Back when I was growing up, well, they were kind of tense. I mentioned my father being a veteran in World War II. He served with distinction in Europe and was decorated and came back. But one of the things that that generation experienced, the Latinos anyway, was that when they went over and liberated Europe, and he talked about, for instance, Paris, he got his naturalization papers signed while he was in Paris, France, in 1945. He just liberated the city a few months before. Latinos there at that time and during the war overseas were treated as heroes, as Americans. They were Americans first, and they were liberators, and they were not treated as second-class citizens. On his return to Dallas, he was back to that same old grind. And Texas and Dallas was still part of a repressive and exclusive kind of club. As I said, it was still kind of a small city, and there really hadn't been a lot of upward mobility for certainly the Latino community that began to grow a lot after the Mexican Revolution of 1910, like when my parents and grandparents came over, but also with World War II, a lot of people coming in to work on the war plants. That's where my mom came in from the country, just to work with her mother, and her mother was working in the war plants. And so that time opened up a lot of opportunities for Latinos, for African Americans, for women. And then when the war was over, that kind of wanted to shut the door and not let those opportunities continue on in the natural way they should have been able to continue on. So it was difficult. I mean, finding jobs, steady jobs that paid regularly, and insurance, dental stuff like that. For instance, in the Barrio, even after the war, when I was still a kid, there were only 2 Spanish-speaking pediatricians that were catering to the Latino community in Dallas. And initially, both of them veterans, Dr. Saldivar, who had served in the Pacific, and Dr. Dejaro, who had also served in the Pacific. But that was it. And so finding even a doctor or a lawyer, that was going to be difficult to do. Other kinds of services like that, dentists, things like that, we kind of take for granted. There wasn't that they were still marginalized.
I see.
So it was still tough. I mean, my dad worked hard. My mother took a job, and she had always worked. As I said, I think modeled on what she saw her mother and my great-grandmother doing. It always worked, and so it was. They were both contributing to the upkeep of the household, and that was very, very significant. One thing I did begin to see that was, I think, perhaps different than the students at SMU was that all during this period of time, just as my mom was working, we had an extended family. We had a great-grandmother and a grandmother living with us, my mom's mother and grandmother. And so they would take care of us during the day. When my mom worked, my dad worked. And also, too, I began to see and appreciate that extended family and my Latino community, too. I mean, which is the cousins and two of my aunts took care of my grandfather, and it was this kind of constant visiting back and forth between. I used to see my grandfather, my dad's father, every Saturday. We'd go over to see him, and even though he was fairly old by that time, but that was just kind of an obligation that seemed natural and kind of and what you would expect. Coming to SMU, I didn't see that so much. I mean, these were much more, the WASP families on campus were much more nuclear type families, and the extended families were you saw on the holidays, if then, you know, when you're maybe all vacation in Florida or whatever, and but it wasn't anything like the regular day-to-day life I saw in the barrio.
I see. What were some of the dreams you held as a child?
I'm really appreciative of the fact that my mother and my father, especially my mom, really encouraged us to read. And that was something that was key. And so if I had any kind of dreams at all, it probably revolved on how I was going to use this knowledge I was gaining all the time. I remember my dad taking me to the public library, the branch library there in the Oak Lawn area all the time. And well, once we'd visit my grandfather, then we'd go to the library or do shopping or whatever, which happened to be right next to the grocery store. He shopped, I go to the library. And so there was this, and it was a teeny tiny little library. I mean, it was very, very small. And, but that was so key in my upbringing. So very key, and kind of took it for granted that everybody was, you know, checking out books and going to the library. I said, I guess it was like in junior high where I began to really notice all of a sudden kids that I'd gone to elementary school weren't there anymore. I'd look around, they were gone. And in junior high in particular, you could see Latino dropout beginning to happen for a variety of reasons. And at that time, I certainly didn't understand them. But fortunately, my education at SMU in the sociology department was that what happens at kind of middle school when you're poor, or you're an immigrant, or everyone has to work, or you're having to migrate for work, it's migrant labor. I mean, that was harder for me to understand though at that time where my friends were going and why they weren't able to continue to participate in education, and albeit a public education, maybe not a very good one, but at least that kind of stability was very, very important to me, and I began realizing that not everybody, all my friends had that.
I see. And how was high school life for you?
High school was not a really great experience. I think public school in Dallas in those days, there weren't any Latino teachers, or certainly not administrators or principals or anything. And I began to see some of the inequities in the public education system really early on, like even in elementary school. And it kind of soured me a little bit to education, or at least teachers a little bit, and how they meted out discipline more selectively, and were harsher on the Latino students, and what African American students I saw were really in high school and junior high. You could see the difference there as well. So that kind of old line kind of prejudice was evident in these kind of older teachers. A lot of the older schools wind up with older, not so good teachers, you know? And so I began to experience that, and high school was really no different. One thing about high school, though, that kind of propelled me forward, and I think a lot of people forward at my high school, was that it was the middle of the Vietnam War, and we began to not feel good about a lot of authority figures, not the least of which was our teachers and our principal. But on the nation as a whole, we began to be more skeptical and cynical and question authority, because it really hadn't gotten us too far. At least we saw at that juncture. It had gotten us into a really bad mess in Vietnam, where again a lot of my friends were going off and being drafted and not coming home, or coming home in a box. So that was not. We began to really question that in high school, and I was part of the student paper. I did political cartoons, which I thought was kind of not very good at, but I tried. And we actually had an underground paper that we started, which of course the administration didn't like very much. So we decided that since we were getting such grief, we should just run and try to take over student government as well. And that's when I ran for senior class president. And it's a miracle I won, but we did. And part of my campaign was to replace the principal, who'd been there like 30 years. And That was in this fall, and by this spring, he had been replaced by the first Latino principal in the
Wow.
D.I.S.D. in the school district.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, he was a good principal too. So we felt we had accomplished something, and that I think, and which the cynicism is one way of, I guess, dealing with things, but I began to see how important it was to self-actualize, and that we can do things, and we could, if we move it certainly as a whole or as a group of people, we can affect change.
Absolutely.
It's something I hold dear today.
And you mentioned earlier your cousin prompted you or led you to choosing
Renee
SMU.
Martinez, yes.
Renee Martinez.
Mm-hmm.
Were there any other factors that led you to choose SMU?
Well, it was close to home, and there was a certain apprehension about getting too far away. I think you still see that with especially minority students and if they have extended families, things like that, is how far are you talking about going? I mean, I did have Renee's brother, who was a doctor, did say I should get out of town and go somewhere else, you know, go off to the East Coast or the West Coast, and I did kind of think maybe I should have, but the point was that the proximity, I was able to get some financial aid and help me with, grants, and people like Renee were very, very helpful of that in trying to get things set up so I could at least have the opportunity to go here from a financial perspective. It would have been impossible but for the financial aid.
I see. And at the time, did SMU have any sort of reputation amongst the Latinx community?
Not that I'm aware of. It was kind of like today, it's still kind of an island to itself in the middle of a vast metropolitan area, and it's breaking out of that bubble still takes an effort if you want to. You could go to school here all 4 years, or you could teach out here for dozens of years and not really get out of the bubble too much. And that's not too unlike a lot of academic situations, but the SMU's reputation in the Latino community was pretty nil at that point. I didn't know it until later when I started doing my work out here as an undergraduate, though there had been some people in the sociology department who had done some real kind of basic demographic research, sociological research in the old Dallas, Little Mexico area. During the 30s, kind of in the 40s, kind of part of the whole movement in the United States for urban renovation, clean up slums, that kind of stuff that was going on. And they had done some early work in that, which I actually found real useful in work that I did later on. But it was not, other than, there was really no kind of reputation, other than the football team. I guess I should say that. There was a period of time there when the Doak Walkers and people like that were playing that SMU football. That's what you thought when you heard SMU.
I see.
Out there in the community.
What were your expectations coming into SMU?
I wasn't sure. I mean, I was real apprehensive. I was aware that I didn't have quite the education background that the kids I was going to be sitting in class were going to have, and so there was a lot of apprehension. And actually, several of the kids from my high school also got scholarships and went to SMU, which I might just add kind of parenthetically. I know when the recruiters came out from the colleges to my high school to kind of go back on what the school was like, North Dallas High School, which is still there. The counselors, the guidance counselors, said that none of the kids at our school were capable of going to college, and dissuaded the college recruiters from even bothering. That said, so those kind of stories and those kind of realities that I saw every day in high school did cause me some real cause for concern when I got to SMU. Now, it didn't take me long for those fears to kind of subside because while everybody, I began to realize that it was something you could do, and something that if you worked yourself and applied to, it was going to work. And then, as I said, I had some of my friends from even my own high school who were there with me, had started with me, so there was a nice kind of continuity there that was kind of important. And of course, I knew the city, and a lot of the kids here didn't. I had a car, so maybe there was a certain popularity that comes with that, and then again, get involved in kind of student government. I did that pretty quickly.
So when you first arrived to the school, how welcoming was it?
Pardon me?
When you first arrived on campus, how welcoming was the school?
I didn't find anything unwelcoming. The students themselves had never seen Latinos or certainly African Americans very much. Maybe a little bit more than that, but there was not really an exposure to the Latino community for most of the undergraduate students when I was here. So a lot of it was kind of just teaching and learning things like Mexican food and real basic stuff. Of course, that's not like it is now, and I think the tortilla has surpassed the potato chip in popularity, for junk food. So, I mean, that's kind of how things have changed so tremendously, but not back in those days. So, everyone was pretty welcoming. I found, in particular, the faculty very, very welcoming. They're kind of a realization that the Latino community in particular was one that they had not been tapped into, and was just demographically was a big growing segment of the community. There had been, and my family had been part of, the Rio Grande Conference of the Methodist Church, United Methodist Church, and we go back many generations with that church. And so I was, as far as in reputation, there was that kind of reputation, that the school, and especially the Perkins School of Theology, and the people they were graduating and going back into the community, those people had a grounding in reality. The folks who were being sent out as ministers from Perkins, and I'd seen them, I'd worked with them. They had been pastors in my school, in my churches, or had been trained there, or passing through in some sort of way, or music directors or whatever, and that was important. I mean, and to this day I have utmost respect for the people that go through Perkins School, and the people that, in fact, I tended to study over at the Bridwell Library more than anywhere else, because it was quiet and the people were respectful and weren't very rowdy.
And did you live on campus?
I did. I lived off campus.
All 4 years?
I did.
Roommates?
No, it was no, just kind of stayed at home basically.
Okay.
There was a little period there at the end where I was living in an apartment near campus, but no, pretty much an off-resident or off-campus kind of resident.
Okay. And you mentioned you were involved in Senate and finance too, correct? Is that correct?
Yeah, the thing that I think one of the first things that interested me was, of course, the Student Senate, but of course, getting on that was a little more tricky. You had to obviously run and all. I should kind of back up and say one of the first mentors I had was in the sociology department, Dr. Wharton King, who had been chair and had been there a long time. He became my counselor there for a while, and he wanted us to revive the sociology club. It'd had been up and down, and kind of depending on the interest of the students. And so a group of us who were sociology majors got together to do that, and kind of revive the club and figure out, do regular things. Now, of course, it's easier to do regular things if you have money, and we recognize that the money that to be had for students was in the finance committee of the Student Senate, and so that required us interacting with the finance committee of the Student Senate. So one of the things that I wanted to do was to be on the finance committee, and which I did, and we were able to fund a lot of good programs through that. And then not fund some really silly programs like Purina's blankets or something. I don't know what it was. Forget what it was. We did have to turn away the cheerleaders a couple of times.
So how would you describe the social life at the time, or how would you describe the culture of the students?
Well, it was then, I don't know now, but it was very much a fraternity sorority kind of place when it came to social thing. I stayed away. I was an independent from any of that kind of work, though some of my friends did get involved in it, and I think maybe did have good experiences, but that was not going to be the route I was going to go. So my social life tended to be still based in the city as a whole, the community as a whole, not just on campus, not just fraternity and sorority row. And that's really where I kind of wanted to stay involved. I was also involved in things, political stuff going on in the city. It was during my time when I was a student here is that Santos Rodriguez was murdered by a police officer in the Dallas barrio over in that area. He was only 13 years old, and he was his head was blown off by a cop interrogating him in the backseat of a squad car for like supposedly, allegedly rifling a Coke machine, which turned out he didn't do. But that was 1973, and that was one of the largest real demonstrations or riots that we as a community, the African American community came together, the Latino community together, the faith community came together, all of us to demonstrate in downtown at the old city hall there, which is still down there, and it was an important time. I mean, police abuse of Latinos and African Americans had gone on for a long time, and had not been addressed, and that was just a real catalyst for us to do something about it. So a lot of us were involved in that demonstration. We were involved in subsequent demonstrations and things to kind of change the tenor of police-community relationships, which still goes on today. The conflict with the community and the police seems to be an everlasting kind of issue, and that's very unfortunate. You would always hope that police would be the persons you would go to for help and not try to avoid. I mean, you see that now with the kind of attacks on immigrants now and trying to round them up everywhere. I mean, how can a community be safe if I can call the police and say, oh, there's a drug dealer next door, or there's someone's hassling my kids, and without fear of being deported or my children being, fatherless or motherless or something like that. Those kind of approaches to community policing are all kinds of wrong, and we saw it there with Santos's murder.
I see. Can you walk me through a typical day as a student here?
Get up, get dressed, come to school, drive through Highland Park, which was always a little nerve-wracking. The only tickets I ever got was driving my old car through Highland Park to get here, and then class, and really enjoying going to meetings. There were SMU, while there were good, nice demonstrative events and rallies and things going on downtown in Dallas and all throughout the country, we also had a few on campus because, again, primarily because of the war. And we were going to meetings with either the Student Center about actual meetings like the Senate or the Finance Committee or whatever it might be, or a Sociology Club, and arranging for speakers to come in there. There was also a kind of real concern about the war. The bombing of the harbor in Haiphong, the continuous bombing of North Vietnam, and we was a group of us who were organized and worked toward trying to have moratoriums, call people out of class, which we did successfully a few times, and got them to. There was even a time we took over the Perkins Administration building for a day and a night. And those are the kinds, again, that's kind of self-actualization, which you have to kind of do for a cause you really believe in. And that was important to us. It was important to people now who protest and demonstrate. And it was done. We had more than our share of demonstrations on campus. Not the likes of what you saw on the West or the East Coast, but I think people tend to forget that we did have them here too.
Can you tell us a bit more about the demonstrations at the Perkins building?
I can't remember which horrible thing President Nixon had done that did bombing or doing something and renewing bombing, but we called out a moratorium there during the day, we called people to come out of their classrooms and boycott classes and or if the faculty cooperated with, which many of them did, or a few of them did, have the classes outside. It was the spring, I remember that. And then by that evening, the whole thing was to we demonstrated in front of the Perkins building, out on the main quad, and then by that evening, taking over the building. Of course, we were kicked out eventually by the cops, campus police, but that's it was a lengthy affair, and we did our best to underscore the problems that we felt were going on with Vietnam. And you have to kind of remember too, when SMU has a long kind of history, if it has a history at all, with a certain kind of elite segment of the community. And that elite segment is often tied to the oil and gas business, or during the war, the war business, making bombs and missiles, still is. And so it wasn't so abstract to us. You know, when you're protesting the war in Vietnam, or you protest a war today, you know, Dallas and the community and the wealthy in this community tend to still make money off of war and violence and death. So now that has to be kind of remembered. And so anytime, and universities invest in these companies, universities do business with companies. I recall, for instance, when we were trying to get the university to divest its interest in some of the work going on in apartheid South Africa. All right? And you know, in retrospect, you think, well, that's kind of a no-brainer, right? I mean, you should. That was a horrible system. But it was very difficult to people to understand that why a university, and this university, should not be investing in that kind of government. So, I don't know how the campus feels today and what people are up to and how they want to feel, but I mean, if anything they should learn and remember is that this school is part of a bigger whole, and the investments and the businesses that contribute to this school, you know, it doesn't hurt to occasionally look back at those connections and those monetary ties.
What were the results of the demonstration at Perkins?
Well, the war didn't end, unfortunately, not then. But we like to think that maybe it helps to make that end come closer, and so it was. I mean, I always tell people, you know, who are wanting change, and we learned that then in my undergraduate years and in my graduate years and law school years, that, you know, it's not going to happen overnight. You know, if you really are looking for instant results, one demonstration, one letter to the editor, or, you know, one court case, that's not going to change things. It's going to it takes persistence. You know, you can't be like just a kind of weekend kind of warrior on those things. If you're going to have those things are going to be important to you in your career and your life. Those take kind of constant vigil and constant kind of work. And you know, and you have to understand that you step on toes. People, sometimes you're no longer invited in polite society, or polite society can't understand why you protest. But those things are important to me, and I saw at SMU back when I was here a lot of my fellow students who also felt that was important, and to this day would stand up for the right cause.
What would you say was your most memorable experience here at SMU?
The mentoring, especially by Dr. King and people in the sociology, was really very, very important to me. And I would certainly encourage anyone today that to find it was a smaller school. I mean, I remember my friends who went to UT Austin or something, you know, and it was just such a big place. I don't know how I'd ever gotten along down there. I'd gotten lost probably, like many other students probably did. So it was real important that it was smaller. The campus, the classrooms were smaller, and I could work directly with my professors that I got along with well. You know, and not just Dr. King, others who mentored and wanted to work with me, and maybe saw some promise there. That was very, very, very important to me. And if there were to be any success in my life, I really owe it to that kind of early mentoring here at SMU, and those professors who took time to do that.
What did your friend group look like?
We had begun a kind of a Los Chicanos organization, and we were maybe undergraduates, maybe a dozen kids, and they were maybe 2 or 3 at the law school, maybe 2 or 3 were at the divinity school, and the graduate program there. So there weren't a lot of us, but we began to work toward one of the things we recognized we needed was kind of a meeting place. I mean, we needed a place to sit down and talk and go through these things or socialize, and so we worked toward getting an actual house, a kind of a Chicanos organization house, and those for the African American students had also done that. They had the upstairs, we had the downstairs, and right over on Airline. It's no longer there, but we worked to have a kind of a community house for folks of color and folks of a different kind of ethnicity, and that was so good. And we'd do parties, we'd do dinners over there, and work with the African American students, and we'd do things together, and it helped us to recognize some of the kind of same boat we were in as students of color, and some of the class differences, which obviously were so stark, and we didn't feel so bad about being able to talk about them there. I can recall, you mentioned a friend, I remember recalling one date I had with a woman, wonderful person, and I think she was in my English class, I don't recall, but we went out to dinner, and she was talking about her family in Arizona who had all these, thousands of acreage of lettuce and everything. This is the same time I'm protesting and boycotting lettuce for Cesar Chavez, and it's like, and it's not as she just didn't understand the kind of connection there, and we were able to sit down and have a nice dinner together and remain friends.
What was the name of the house?
I think it was, I think it was called the Multicultural Center. It was some sort of strange little name like that, but we just called it the Chicano House, and like I said, it was just a ramshackle little building, but it took us a while for us to get the university to understand the importance of that, and it was really important to us. It's right behind the Fondren Library.
Have you seen the MGC house, the Multicultural Greek Council house?
No, I've not seen that.
It's on campus, right on Airline. It's right behind Airline parking garage. Okay. It's for the Multicultural Greek fraternity sororities, and it's just kind of a hub. Yeah,
that's, as you kind of allude to, it's just a real key kind of thing to have that sort of place. I mean, we didn't have the fraternity or the sororities to hang out like that. So that was a nice place for us to be, or some did, but that was still a nice place for us. We all had, which we knew we were all basically on the same page about a lot of issues.
And can you clarify, did the Los Chicanos group on campus, was it already here when you first came here, or did you help start it up?
No, I helped start it. There may have been a couple of little false starts getting it done, but I know it was one of the early pros who actually kind of put something together, and I think we actually got an advisor. I think he probably started part-time first, but through the administration, but eventually got a full-time advisor to work with us, a Latino. The one thing that was sort of stark then too, kind of like in high school, was this lack of Latino or African American professors and faculty members. That was pretty kind of eye-opening still. And it took a while for us to begin to work toward having the university address that. I mentioned my mentor, Dr. King. I guess probably one of the most momentous things that he helped me do, and which really propelled me along the way after SMU, was that as part of my independent study was to actually develop a course, an undergraduate course. And the one I did for the department was called Chicanos in the Southwest, which I think is still technically on the books, but and be able to team teach that with Professor Dr. King my senior year.
Wow.
And actually, after I graduated, I came back and taught that as an adjunct off and on for a long time.
That's wonderful.
But it took a while to finally get a professor over in the sociology department, finally over in history department. A few of the departments began to see those academicians come out of the graduate mills and began to come on campus. That was very, very important. But the step for Dr. King and the sociology department actually let me develop that class and see it be taught, teach it, and see it continue on even after I graduated. It was very, very important.
And I saw you were involved in the Blue Key Honorary Society.
Yeah.
Could you tell me a little
Blue
bit
Key
about
Society.
that?
It was, I think, well, I wish I could tell you a lot more about it, but we didn't really do very much that I recall. It was, I think, like a kind of male honorary back in the time when they still had this segregation going on with the female and male honoraries, but it was, they were just guys, I don't know, for some reason. And I was nominated to be part of that, and it was, I can't say that we did anything of any significance.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the wonderful experiences you had within sociology. How would you describe race relations manifesting themselves within that department at the time?
Oh, well, the sociologists, and getting that's my undergraduate and some of my graduate training, they were pretty aware. And again, this is during the Vietnam War and all. There's issues of the counterculture, there's issue of race, there's issue of class. If there's any department on campus that's kind of aware of the reality of those issues, was the sociology department.
Right.
And so nothing really surprised them. And so the fact it was kind of sad, I know for a while that after I left, many years, they actually kind of tried to push sociology back into the anthropology department, which didn't make a lot of sense to me, but fortunately it's not that way anymore. But no, they were very key in being a sounding board to like students like myself, our real life experiences. You know, when we talked about cops murdering kids because they're black or brown, they understood that.
I see. How well did you feel that the Latinx community was represented at SMU during your time here?
Well, not real well. I mean, we, even though I was able to get on to run for Student Senate and get on this finance committee, things like that, president of the Sociology Club. I mean, those were smaller kind of things, and not. As you maybe even now, some people don't even care about that. You know, that's Greek life may be much more important, or the next party, okay, all right, or spring break or whatever. And so, so while we felt we were making a difference, those of us who, for instance, demonstrated against the war, or demonstrated against police brutality, or worked in the Student Senate and tried to get better funding and equalization of funding for the student organizations who really were doing things, and not just doing the cheerleader stuff. Those things we got done, but it was probably overshadowed by kind of this institution that had kind of just done certain things the way they had done for decades. Okay, but we can look back, I think, many of us, and recognize that we did make a contribution, an important contribution, but. I mean, I think there's still a kind of a self-selection of students who come here, and I don't think it, by and large, you're inclined to question the status quo. I mean, they are the status quo, and so that's just kind of the reality. In fact, sociologically, they'd be stupid to question the status quo. So speaking, I mean, they would be class traitors. So no, they won't do that. They're not inclined to do that, and there's a more difficult time for them to understand the importance of perhaps changing things around. It was that way then, and probably still that's the way now.
Did the lack of representation amongst the student and faculty populations have any sort of effect on you?
Well, I think if you're in college and you're going to do the next step, right? What are you going to do? You're going to go to grad school, or you're going to go to professional school, or you're just going to go out and get a job. I think where you don't see professors that look like you or talk like you begin to think, well, is that, I'm flourishing as an undergraduate, but would that happen in graduate school? Or I don't see a lot of Latino lawyers or doctors. Is that going to be a real option? Because I don't really see them around me, okay, on campus. And so there was some more concerns about how that next step was going to be, that next chapter, how it's going to work. And I should say the mentors like Dr. King and people in the sociology department and others Dr. Luis Martin, who only recently passed away, who was in the history department. Those were all important folks who were wanting us to do well, but there were not that many of them.
I see.
And there was, we kept growing student body, Latinos and African Americans, pretty much, throughout the time I was there. I mean, big steps, and so, but the change at the faculty level and the administration level, not so much. So that was not keeping pace. Those changes are not keeping pace with the changes in the demographics of the student body.
I see. And overall, as a Latino, how well did you feel that you were treated by other students?
I thought well. I thought really well. I think a lot of the Latino community doesn't suffer the issue of race like the African American community did. We have the legacy of hate and racial hatred toward African Americans is so deep in this country, and certainly in Dallas and every place all the students I went to school came from. Now, we didn't really, most of them never even seen a Mexican or Mexican American when I was a student here. But the legacy of racial hatred and bigotry was real when I was here, and probably still is today. For the African American students, and so I didn't feel that we had the kind of obstacles that the African American students had in front of them based upon simple factors of history. Now, when we would talk about the issues like bilingual education, the importance of language, you could begin to see we'd kind of start losing people there a little bit. Then they begin to think, what's with this? But what we were able to do at SMU, I think at that time, that small group, and what I try to do now, is try to show up the importance of diversity, the beauty of diversity in our community. All right, that's kind of hard to do back at SMU in those days, because everybody's kind of alike. All right, and if you're not like them, wouldn't you want to be like them? And so we had to really work at making people understand that there's a beauty in diversity. There's a beauty in speaking different languages, or being bilingual, or eating different kinds of food, or celebrating different kind of holidays, or having different religions. That was still kind of hard for people to understand. I don't think there was an animus toward it. It was just kind of new to them. And I think for folks who are kind of sheltered, it's always going to be kind of difficult for them to understand. Fortunately, we didn't have the kind of this idea that immigrants are bad. I mean, it was always kind of part of Texas, but it's nothing like you see now, where it's now kind of part of a movement in the whole country, maybe in the entire world, and nations around the world where our borders need to be shut. I mean, I was here at a time in SMU when the saying on the Statue of Liberty really did people believe that. Okay. And that that you should be welcoming people. My father came to this country in 1916 to the United States. My mother's family came to the United States in 1643 from Scotland. So they were both immigrants, both immigrant families. That's really difficult for sometimes people to understand that we were all really immigrants here. Yes. And it's just a matter of timing. And a few hundred years here and there doesn't make any difference. If there had been that kind of harsh attitude like I see now in this country toward me back when I was at SMU, it might have been much more difficult for me. I mean, I talk to Latino kids now in high school, and whatever kind of mentoring I might be able to do with them, and they're actually afraid to go home at night because they're afraid that their parents may have been deported. I never have to worry about that when I was a student. So to think that an entire generation of people, high schoolers right now, or dreamers, for instance, in that kind of category, might be shut off from becoming the next doctor, the next lawyer, the next business person, for something as stupid as their parents' immigration status. I assure you, my mom's ninth great grandfather, who came over from Scotland to Virginia in 1643, he was undocumented, I assure you. I assure you.
How did you feel about graduation?
I was just happy to graduate. I mean, it's always kind of, you never know when, we're struggling to get at your hours, and you're really obsessive about that toward the end, making sure it's adding up right, and you got the PE down and all that you're supposed to have, and really silly things like that. Well, my counselors are really good about making sure that kind of all happened. You're always apprehensive about it. I was fortunate. The part of my work at SUM, I was able to get a national fellowship to go off for graduate study anywhere I could get into, any school I could get into in sociology, from the American Sociological Association, and it was very, very generous. And so I had to get in. I fortunately got into a lot of graduate schools, and I decided to go to the University of Wisconsin at Madison because it had a large program and it had a professor I wanted to study with there, but there was certain apprehension. I mean, obviously, I was not going to do my graduate work here. I was at SMU. I was going to have to get out of town and all that kind of good stuff. And so there was certain kind of concerns about leaving family and friends.
And did you end up pursuing the degree?
I did it. I pursued it for a while. Then I realized I didn't want to teach the rest of my life.
It was a PhD program?
Yeah, PhD program.
Okay.
It was a PhD program. And I said, this is not. And of course, I already taught that little undergraduate class I developed with Dr. King, and I liked that, but I didn't think I could do that, all the time. And I'd always kind of wanted to be a lawyer, and I said, well, this is a good time to kind of transition back over and think about law school now and get into. I enjoyed my graduate work, and the professors in Madison were much more kind of radical than anything down at SMU, so that was kind of fun. But they were, and certainly Madison, which is kind of like Austin, it's a state capital, a huge school, and their big thing was trying to change State Street, the main street, from State Street at that time into the Ho Chi Minh Trail. They wanted to rename that the street. It didn't happen, but no, I thought that law school was where I needed to be, and just came back and worked, got myself ready, put a little money aside, and went on to University of Texas at Austin Law School.
I see. But before you did all of that, overall, as you reflect back on your time at SMU, how do you feel about it?
I feel good. I mean, I really feel good. I mean, I worked a little bit with the Alumni Association for a while. I was on the board for a while and all that. It was a great education, a really, really good education. I mean, I look back on it now, and I'm very lucky to have received that. And I'm proud of the work I did here. My academic work and the other work that I did. It really opened up a lot of vistas. People I still know and see in the city or run into across the country and all. And I think the university still has a lot to do with reaching out. I think the people like President Bush and Laura Bush, who've done so much to, make Dallas and SMU more global in its look, is very important. And those are the kind of things which I think can only add to the importance of a school like this. I just hope that the students continue to look outward too, and not to be so insular in how they might approach it, and the faculty and the administration.
And so after you completed your JD, what prompted you to return to Dallas?
Mostly because it's my hometown, and been for my hometown for generations, and the idea of when you're in a practice law, I'm a civil trial lawyer. I deal with juries, and I do commercial litigation. So you need to have a foot in your community. You need to understand your jury pool and your legal community that you're working with, and the judges and the other lawyers, and so this was a pretty easy choice to come back here, though staying in Austin in retrospect might have been a good idea. But no, it was really because I wanted to work in the Dallas legal community, and with my undergraduate degree from SMU, law degree from Texas, I thought that was a nice marriage.
And how was your transition into your professional career?
I hit the ground running. I was lucky that I'd gotten a job there while I was still in school. I clerked all the time. I worked all the time. I was in law school in Austin, and so we just moving from clerking on to a full-time job was pretty simple. And got a job here in Dallas and started studying for the bar and doing all that kind of good stuff like that. But I've always had still a passion though for the changes that you think changes to be made in a university campus. You have to look at the law to see where changes really need to be kind of worked at. I'm happy to see how many lawyers that I know, in fact, one that I interviewed not too long ago, kind of like you're doing before, an article in the Texas Law Book about his work in the early Justice Department during the Kennedy administration and the Johnson administration, when they were working on trying to segregate the schools and crush the Klan, and he was this young white lawyer who was from Birmingham, and he was going to be one of the lawyers who was going to change the South, and he did. He became kind of a mentor of mine here in Dallas as a lawyer. So I think that my time here made me recognize as a lawyer there's still a lot you need to get back to. I was elected as a LULAC president, for my little local council not too long ago, and you begin to see how organizations sort of change. LULAC, the League of United Latin American Citizens, back when I was a student here, was sort of like a bunch of old guys just sitting around drinking beer, not really doing too much. And that's not still the same case, but I see now a lot of young LULAC members, high school members, and people like that. They're working with the Dreamers and things like that. So you can see how I like it as a sociologist, see how organizations evolve and can change and take on different priorities. That's good. That's very encouraging.
Do you want to tell us about your work?
I like one of the things I've noticed, and of course I've been practicing law 35 years, is that back when I was younger, we would go to court more often. People got their day in court, you won, you lost cases, whatever, and you win some, you lose some, and all that. But you would go as a trial lawyer, you would go to court, and that was your job. And you work up your cases and take them to court and go to a jury. There's been a lot of pushback in Texas, and probably nationwide, but certainly in Texas, to push back against going to court. People are afraid of juries, which is too sad in a way. The right to jury is mentioned 3 times in our Constitution. And those are very important kind of issues you need to be thinking about. That right to a jury trial is so important. And I always sort of try to keep those, while there's a lot of pressure, especially in the business community, to arbitrate or mediate, forced arbitration, and it's just so different now. Non-disclosure agreements, you can't disclose. So if someone makes a bad product, they get to cover that up. The law still needs a lot of changes, and so I work at kind of different levels. I like my work in the courtroom, and I enjoy working with my clients and finding a good lawsuit and working with a jury. But at the same time, I also work with the bar associations on making sure that people right to jury. People are not hemmed in with non-disclosure agreements and handcuffed and trying to penalize people for like whistleblowers and things like that. Those are things we have to kind of keep as lawyers, keep alive, and allow people to those avenues to make our country better.
I see. And I see you've published a number of writings.
I like writing, and I wish I could just do that full time and give up my day job, but I can't do that. But I have been fortunate I think starting coming back when I came back from law school, the Dallas Morning News, I work with an editor there who actually teaches now at the journalism department here, Carolyn Barta. She was an editor at the Morning News then, and Carolyn helped me understand writing for a newspaper, what that was like and how different that is than doing an academic paper or doing a law paper or a law brief. And so I kind of fell in love, thanks to Carolyn a lot, with the idea of doing more general kind of writing. And then I'm fortunate to have other kind of stuff like the book on Little Dallas' Little Mexico, and it's still fun to do that. That's another sad thing. I kind of hate to see publications kind of drying up, I read my newspaper today, the Dallas Morning News. I've read all my life, and it's kind of a little shadow of what it used to be. It's just so sad to look. Of course, people don't even read the papers anymore, but even if you read it online, it's kind of, there used to be a bunch of sections and lots of. photographs. I remember the day, I was talking to a friend about a day when they had cartoonists, back to when I was doing cartoons for my newspaper in high school. The morning news had their dedicated cartoonists who would do a cartoon every day, a political cartoon. And they've, many newspapers have cut staff, reporting staff, artists, reporters, photographers are being fired and having to find. So it's a very different kind of world for the press. And that's another thing that's really saddens me. The press is so very important, and a free press is so very, very important. And to see good papers like the morning news have to cut staff and all it saddens me a lot.
And you have your own law office now, that's correct?
I work as of counsel to White Wiggins and Barnes, which is an office downtown, and then I have my own kind of law office of Sol Villasana, and so we can kind of do a little both.
How does that feel to have your own law office?
Well, I've had them off and on. Like for a while, I would take effect. I was talking to someone before I sat down with you about. He's a lawyer. He wants to take a little break, a little sabbatical, and do something else. I said, well, I've done that, and told him how possible it is. I guess the first one I took was when I went off to work for. I worked on the National Presidential Advance team for one of the presidential candidates in 1988. At that time. Senator Lloyd Benson of Texas was running for vice president, and so I was basically working with his staff on going out and doing presidential advance. And of course, that was a real short window of time. It wasn't like I gave up a lot of time, but it was a nice little break, and it was fascinating work. And going in before these presidential candidates, working with the Secret Service and the local law enforcement and all that, and that was a fascinating break. And then I worked for, I went down to work for Governor Ann Richards when she was elected governor in Austin, and worked for her, and didn't really do law with her, but I was able to do work with her Department of Commerce, and working with issues like trade in Mexico, and we're understanding the importance of our border economy to our state as a whole, important our imports and exports are, and help me really get a better handle on some of the economics of international issues, and how important that is, and how our international, and how especially our border area is. I look back on that first class that I taught at SMU, the Chicanos now Southwest, and I named that for a reason, because the Southwestern area is such a distinct kind of area, even back when I first developed that class, and it's still has a certain feel to it, the border area, and a good feel, I would say. An international feel, multiple languages, a lot of trade, people, businesses, and all that. And so I think that those little sabbaticals I took from doing law were important, especially the one working for Governor Richards.
I see. Does it feel fulfilling at all to have come sort of full circle from when you were younger and noticing there weren't any Latino doctors, lawyers, etc., and to now, after college, you have your own law office here in Dallas?
That's a good point, and I'm glad you bring that up. I can remember how proud I was when I first got my name and photograph at the Dallas Bar Association roster, and I remember kind of working so hard because that would be a big step for me, because I only knew a couple of lawyers, Hispanic lawyers, when I was growing up in town. All of them had gone to the SMU Law School when it had a night program after World War II. And so it was real important to then know that I had gone through SMU, done well here, gone to grad school, gone to a good law school like Texas, and now had my own practice, and had worked my way so I could open my own practice, that I understand the law, I had the mentors, the association with the judges, and I do a lot of mediation now, which I find very, very satisfying. So that was a big big thing to me. You're right.
So overall, what does life look like for you now?
I'm trying to enjoy this new chapter of my life, where I'm trying to be more of a mentor to younger folks, especially Latinos and Latinas who are coming up and doing things, and I still stay do programs in high schools and try to stay in touch with what's going on with that, our high school students and what the youth is thinking about things. And this is this generation that I'm talking about, your generation, is the kind that really takes now our place in developing kind of our next generation of leaders in this country. And we really count on you. I mean, our time is kind of behind us, my generation, and we won some and we lost some, and we were able to affect some change, but we certainly didn't do it all. And so I'm hopeful. What I want is to see people like you and your generation continue to think out of the box, be sure that you're inclusive and not exclusive, and that you understand the opportunities that need to be available for all people in this nation. And just like our country was supposed to be when it was founded, over 200 years ago, and not turn to some kind of strange country we never have, thought would be around and would be unrecognizable. So, in my last few chapters here of my life, I want to make sure my country is one that I recognize and one that I continue to be proud of, and that like my father fought for, and other generations in my family have fought for, going back to the Revolutionary War in this country. That's the kind of country I want to continue to be sure to sustain.
Do you have any regrets at all?
I don't think so. I mean, we always wanted to do something else, and if there's one regret probably I have is I don't travel as much as I would like to travel, and that's there was one of my biggest disappointments at SMU was when I forget what it was, some summertime thing, when I wanted to do a study abroad. And I saw everybody else is going abroad, and I thought that, it sounded like a good idea to me. And I didn't want to go to Paris or Spain or Rome. I actually wanted to study in China. And there was a program that I was able to find to do that, and I just couldn't get the money together. And I remember talking to the financial aid people, and they said, studying abroad would just be a lark. That's the word she used, a lark. And that was sort of disappointing. And so if there's a regret I have, it's one, just not pounding the table and screaming at her a little bit, and getting her to reconsider, but also not probably following up and traveling as much as I would have liked to abroad.
I see. And you still remain connected to your family?
Yeah, my mom's still alive, and she's 91 years old, and I lost my father a few years ago. He passed away at 92, but I still have Renee, my cousin I referenced, and I still see each other and get along real well. His brother is Servando, who's a doctor in San Antonio, and works at the medical school there, the UT Medical School. We still have do connect. The one sad thing was a year ago, as a matter of fact, one of my cousins who had continued the little mom and pop grocery store in Dallas, Little Mexico, he passed away. He'd worked in that store since he was a kid in the 1930s.
Wow. And
he was still open the day he died a year ago. And I think that's probably the last business to shutter up and close now in that area, in the uptown area. The last little small family-owned business. So the time catches up with us, but and we still are able to connect and talk about issues. In fact, I'll be doing a presentation about my book to the law students at the University of North Texas Law School next week about the issue of gentrification, how neighborhoods are being, changing and transitioning, and people are getting pushed out of neighborhoods because of high rents and all. Of course, I saw that happen directly with Little Mexico, but you're seeing it now all over the urban communities now. So those things never going to go away. And I thank SMU for getting a good grounding in sociology, understanding things like gentrification and understanding stratification and the issue of economics and how all that works and how it affects everybody's life.
Right. Do you remain involved with SMU?
Not as involved as I would like. I do attend a lot of programs out here. The Bush Center is very good about. The library is very good about putting on some really good programs. So I'm out here with some of the things at the history department. I love art. I'm kind of a frustrated artist, and so I'm out here at the Meadows or at the DeGaulier or doing something all the time for things which sort of highlight some of the beauty that we create as human beings, and that we leave for our generations to follow. And theater, I love theater. SMU always had a good theater department. When I couldn't afford anything else as an undergraduate, go watch something at the theater department down there, which is great. They have a great program. Probably my finest professor that I had most fun with was Mary Vernon, who taught art history, a survey class of art history, and she was wonderful. She going down there to the art school, leaving in the hilltop and going down there was always sort of kind of a breath of fresh air, and understanding how the arts are so important. So I'm trying my connection with the schools, trying to do some of the connections with the art and culture and history that I find so important.
Well, Mr. Villasana, is there anything at all that you feel I may have missed, which you would like to further discuss?
I think you've covered everything very much, Ms. Simmons. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for agreeing to be part of the project.
Thank you.